Prime Minister, it's important we look at the facts. Why? Why?
Douglas Ross is sounding pretty scared.
I believe in independence.
And he clapped like a seal.
Hello and welcome to another Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record. Joining me this week are John Ferguson, who's the political editor of the Sunday Mail, and Ben Borland, who's the editor of the Scottish Daily Express. So let's cut to the chase. The three most tedious letters in Scottish politics are again dominating. DRS, otherwise known as the Deposit Return Scheme. Just to summarise, a scheme that was passed by the Scottish Parliament was supposed to include things like glass. The UK government said that they would only grant a key exemption if glass was excluded. And now the Scottish government have come back saying that at the very earliest, this scheme will only go ahead in late 2025. So it's been canned for a couple of years. John, just in your view, is this scheme ever going to go ahead?
It looks like if it is going to go ahead, it won't be till 2025 now. And I guess the big question is going to be whether all of these companies that have spent an awful lot of money preparing for it to go ahead far sooner than that are going to get any compensation. The other big question is this an example of Scottish government incompetence, or is it unacceptable meddling in the part of the UK government that's resulted in that perfectly legitimate?
Or both. Could be both.
Well, yeah, it could be a both, certainly. I think that those are the questions that we need to get answers to now.
Ben, the Scottish Government effectively put this in cold storage for a couple of years. I think where the story is now at is Compo. All the businesses that have shelled out for infrastructure and kits in order to facilitate this scheme, will they be pursuing either the Scottish or UK governments to get some money back? So I think I read this morning they might have monthly storage fees, for instance. Do you think this is a big headache for the Scottish government, this one?
It's a huge headache. I mean, the scheme itself has been a disaster. I think I spoke to people involved in industry months ago, early last year, saying, look, this is heading for the rocks. It's not going to work. It's got so many problems. We need a UK-wide scheme. Industry's been saying, retailers have been saying, drinks producers have been saying we need a UK-wide scheme for a long, long time. And the people who have refused to consider a UK-wide scheme are the Scottish government. I mean, they were offered one. They were offered a UK-wide scheme starting in March next year as a pilot. Scotland could have piloted this for the rest of the UK. If it was really about the environment and increasing recycling rates, then why on earth not accept the perfectly reasonable compromise that was put forward by Alistair Jack and the UK government and go ahead as planned in March, just without glass bottles? Everyone said that was possible.
Perfectly reasonable compromise, but why did the Tories U-turn on glass?
I think it was stated that there were some problems with glass, and glass can be added at a later date. There's excellent recycling facilities in place already for glass. I mean, I don't know the full details of why glass was excluded from the UK scheme, but certainly cans and plastic bottles. If you ask me, from going around the streets and the country lanes near where I live, cans and plastic bottles are the big littering problem, not glass bottles. It's cans and plastic, and that could have started. That could have started in March.
Yeah, John. Fast forward to 2025, which is when this Scottish scheme might start at the very earliest. Do you think that the Scottish government are maybe waiting for a Labour government to take over before they sort of get their heads around this again? Do you think we've kind of written it off while the Tories are in power down south?
It certainly looks like there will either be they won't be doing anything until there is either a Labour government or a new Conservative government in power, and it kind of looks like they've almost accepted that they are going to need to do this in unison with the UK government, and I suspect accept a lot of it will be driven by the UK government when it finally is implemented. So I'm quite sure the Scottish government would prefer to be working with Labour on it than the Conservatives, because as the question you just asked, why did the Conservatives U-turn on glass? I think we all know that the main reason they did that was because there was an opportunity to give the SNP and the Greens and the Scottish government a bloody nose, and they took it. And I'd imagine they will hope that there would be a better opportunity to work constructively with a Labour government.
Just on devolution more broadly, John, I mean, when we got the Parliament back in, there was a referendum in 97 and then the first elections in 99, both parties on both sides of the border were the same. It was a Labour government or a Labour-led executive at Holyrood and a Labour government at Westminster, and they did broadly cooperate. Now we've got an SNP government in Edinburgh and a Tory government in London, and they're just not really getting on in any capacity whatsoever. So you had the GRR veto, now you've got this spat over a recycling scheme, in which, given some of the rhetoric over COP26, you'd think maybe would be a priority for both administrations. I mean, how strained is devolution just now?
I think that's a fascinating question, and I believe the answer is that it's very strained. When we saw the UK government vetoing the GRR bill, the kind of mood music there was that this has never happened before. There are huge extenuating circumstances why we need to step in and stymie a piece of Scottish legislation that's been voted through by the Scottish Parliament. It's a one-off, and it had to happen because this was intrinsically a piece of flawed, incompetent legislation that would have got in the way of UK laws. But here we are just a couple of months later, and the UK government are doing pretty much exactly the same thing, but using a slightly different mechanism. This time they're using these laws that were introduced after Brexit to ensure a single market across the UK. So the big question is this genuinely just a case of a Scottish government that's lost the plot? They're putting through incompetent legislation right, left and centre, and the UK government is having to step in to stop that happening? Or alternatively, does the UK government, the Conservative government, smell blood? They can see that the SNP are in trouble. They're doing things that aren't as popular with the public as they used to be, and that there's an opportunity there to come in and get in their way, to obstruct what they want to do, to basically devalue devolution, devalue the Scottish Parliament, and wrestle a bit of control back to Westminster. The jury's out on that.
Ben, I mean, there's no doubt that the courts have struck down Holyrood legislation, and of course, famously, they went to court over Indirect 2, and the UK government was vindicated. But on DRS, there's no suggestion, I think, that glass is somehow contrary to the devolution settlement. I mean, the UK government could approve that scheme if they wanted to. I mean, is that not an example of what's been termed muscular unionism?
I think the point is that it's got to be a UK scheme. I think we've all kind of got used to this idea that's been pushed and pushed and pushed by the SNP at Holyrood that everything must be done on a separate Scottish basis. But when it comes to something as simple as the drinks that you buy in this, that all of us buy these drinks. We all buy cans, we all buy bottles, glass or plastic, and you can't have one region of the UK with a separate scheme to other parts of the UK. It's common sense. It's got to be a UK scheme. That's what the Scottish government were offered. They were offered to hold the pilot of the UK scheme, and they've turned it down. I don't think it's a veto in any way. I think it's a very, very reasonable compromise was put forward.
But couldn't you make the same argument about something like the minimum unit pricing, which doesn't apply in England and Wales, but it applies in Scotland? So if they'd introduced that now, Alistair Jack could have got his red pen and said, well, that runs contrary to this internal market.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is a whole other question about whether people in Scotland should have to pay 20p more. I mean, if you're getting one of these cases of my kids at school, quite often we get a case of 12 bottles of mineral water, just, supermarket own brand, and they take those into school. So, a case of 12 of those, that's £2.40 on top of the cost that you're paying already in the middle of a cost of living crisis. I think there's a whole question mark around whether this scheme's viable, because at the moment, those 12 bottles of water.
Get the money back, though.
Well, do you get the money back? You've got to go to one of these vending machines, which there aren't that many. You could get there and it's out of order. You could get there and there's a 3-hour queue. Then you get the money back in the form of vouchers, and you've got to go into the supermarket and then exchange those vouchers for cash at the till. Or, I mean, I don't think it's hard to envisage that a lot of people will simply spend those vouchers in the supermarkets. And lo and behold, the supermarkets are all founder members of Circularity Scotland, the company that's set up to run this scheme.
But it is the case that
I think there's a lot of question marks about how it's been designed. I don't think it's been properly scrutinised. I think, like a lot of these things, they're not really looked at properly until it's too late.
No, I mean, I agree in terms of the detail, but the environment is a matter reserved to Holyrood. I mean, surely a deposit return scheme is within the scope and powers of the Scottish Parliament.
But then the thing is, a Scottish deposit return scheme requires a Scottish barcode on all drinks sold in Scotland. So if you're a brewery in Yorkshire and you've got 8% of your trade in Scotland, 8% of your bottles have to have a completely separate barcode on them. And that's why it's in breach of the internal trade rules. It's the same, and it works the other way for a Highland brewery, whose 90% of their beer goes down south. They're going to also need separate barcodes for beer which is sold in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and beer which is sold in Scotland. And then, if you then get an English can in Scotland and you can't get your money back, I mean, it only works on a UK level. Absolutely.
John,
drinks are sold across the whole country.
John, given the tensions between both governments, do you think that Labour have got a winning hand to play in terms of a line which goes like, it's time to have a UK and Scottish government that actually work together? You're having a Labour government on both sides of the border, rather than fighting all the time. It's time to work cooperatively. Do you think that might appeal to sort of floating voters who are looking at these spats with increasing frustration?
Yeah, I think that would be something that could sound quite nice to voters, but I suspect the first thing that the SNP are going to say is, fine, let's work together. Surely you don't deny Scotland's right to choose in a referendum whether it wants to stay in the United Kingdom. Will you allow us to have one? And Labour are going to say no, and that relationship of cooperation is going to go off on a bad foot.
Yeah, right. Let's move on. A better bit of news for Humza Yousaf this week was the announcement of a new spin doctor. I'm not entirely sure what his full title is. Let's just say head of comms or director of comms and head of strategic advice. Kevin Pringle. If our listeners don't know him, he was the chief spin doctor to Alex Salmond, one of the best spin doctors of his generation. I was a bit surprised that Kevin decided to come back. I thought he was more favourable to Kate Forbes than Humza during the contest. And you know, I presume that he's still close to Alex Salmond, who's not exactly a Humza Yousaf fan. Ben, what did you make of this hire? Good news for Humza?
I think it's good news for Humza. As you say, Kevin Pringle is probably the top spin doctor in Scotland since, you know, the past 15 years. Seemed to, you know, he was very closely involved in Alex Salmond's first years in office, which compared to the current setup now look quite successful. I think as well, it's bad news for the Greens. Kevin appears to be, from the newspaper columns that he's written, no great fan of the Greens or the Butte House Agreement. And I mean, the demise of DRS, I know we've already spoken about this, at some point, Humza Yousaf is going to have to wake up and smell the coffee that the Butte House Agreement is tanking this government. I mean, putting the Greens in anywhere near government was a crazy idea in the first place. The chickens are coming home to roost. I think the very first thing Kevin Pringle will be saying is, look, we have to extricate ourselves from this deal. And we have to do it in a way that, you know, we can both try and save face, but we have to get rid of them before the next Holyrood, long before the next Holyrood elections.
And really, I mean, that deal was put to SNP members. It was passed overwhelmingly. Humza...
SNP members vote what they're told to vote for.
Well, but then, you know, Humza made clear during the contest that he wanted to keep it, and he was elected, albeit narrowly. Now, if you look at the policies that the Greens are associated with, GRR, DRS, those were SNP policies. Nicola Sturgeon was committed to both of them, and I think that they would have both those policies would have gone through the parliamentary process with or without the Greens. So is it really the sort of Green imprint, or is it more Lorna Slater doesn't appear to be that good a minister?
Or is it Kevin Pringle will say, look, this has started really badly. Let's blame the Greens for all these things that have gone wrong. And you know, say, look, Scotland, we've learned from our mistakes. We won't work with them again. Let's go back to competent SNP stable government like we had when Alex Salmond was in charge.
John, do we... spin doctors have an almost mythical status in the political bubble. I mean, do we overstate their powers too much? I mean, if you've got a struggling administration like the Yousaf administration is just now, how much can a spin doctor actually do to turn that around?
Yeah, I mean, everybody looks good in a government, don't they, when the government's young and fresh, just in the door, doing all their big stuff. Everybody's loving them, and you know, ministers look good, MPs look good, spin doctors look like geniuses. The part of the electoral cycle that the SNP are in now, they've been in power for over 15 years. Things aren't going well for them on a number of fronts, and I think people need to be realistic about how much Kevin Pringle will be able to turn that around. But it's undoubtedly a good signing for them. I think the things that Kevin, he's obviously a clever guy. He's got loads of experience, and he's going to be able to come in and say to him, look, this is how things look from the outside. I think Ben's right that it doesn't appear to be a huge fan of the deal with the Greens. But I also think, Paul, you're correct there in saying that the SNP aren't, or the Scottish Government isn't just pursuing Green policies because of the Green Party. They're pursuing Green policies, I think, because they genuinely believe it's the right thing to do themselves. And what they're coming up against is just like Ben's talking about, buying bottles of water for his family. A lot of these green policies are a hard sell to families who are struggling financially in the here and now. They're things that are designed to make the world a better place in 20, 30 years' time. So, yeah, I mean, Kevin's obviously going to be coming in with lots of ideas and lots of advice. And I think an interesting thing to watch over the next few months is that we're probably going to see just how much power someone like Kevin Pringle is going to have within the new setup. Is he going to be helping Humza get the message right on the policies that Humza wants to pursue, or is he going to be actually advising on the policy rather than just the delivery and the communication of the policy?
What do you think he's going to advise them, John? Because it's kind of all over the shop just now. It's not as chaotic as it was in the first few weeks, but they're still struggling to get momentum.
Yeah, I mean, I think they need to give Humza a bit of credit for sort of doing his best to steady the ship, and what he's clearly doing is listening to other people in the party. I think there clearly has been many years where decisions have been taken among a very small group of people. The impression you get of Humza is that he's a genuinely collegiate guy who is listening more widely, and he wants to do the right thing by the country and by his party, and there is some evidence that that's working. But Ben's right on the really big things. They're going to come back time and time again. So GRR, deal with the Greens, deposit return. The impression you would get from some of the things that Kevin Pringle has written is that he would be advising that these aren't policies that are popular with the public, and that on these big issues they're going to come back and bite the SNP time and time again, and that perhaps they would be better ending the deal with the Greens and pursuing their own sensible green agenda in a slightly more voter-friendly way.
Final issue, Margaret Ferrier, the independent MP in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, following a vote in the House of Commons, a by-election in her seat now looks likely. There's going to be a recall petition. A set number of signatures are required, and we could have a by-election in a few months. Ben, what are your thoughts on this development? It's moving slowly, but it seems inevitable there's going to be a by-election, and you'd have to fancy Labour's chances of taking the seat from the SNP.
Yeah, I think the first. It has moved incredibly slowly. I think the first hurdle is actually getting people out to take part in the recall petition. Because it's been so slow and laboured and such a lengthy process. I think, and obviously there was huge anger at the outset when Margaret Ferrier blatantly broke all these rules that we're all living by. Had there been a recall petition back then, immediately, no question, would have got the 10% within days. And then it sort of died away, and then maybe it was stirred up again when the court case, and then again when she got. I just hope that if the recall petition takes place over the summer, I think is it a 6-week process, that enough people in that constituency actually, because you can't do it online, you've got to go in person. So hopefully enough people actually go and make their feelings clear. So I'm sure they will. I'm sure they'll reach the 10%, but I don't think it's absolutely guaranteed yet.
John, if there is a by-election, do you think it'll be a shoo-in for Labour, or do you think it will be tighter than people expect?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I think you would need to certainly I think it's going to be a disaster for Labour if they can't win it. It would suggest that momentum that they think they've got isn't as strong as they would that it's going to need to be in a general election. I think it's really interesting what Ben was saying there about whether people will turn up and sign this recall petition. I think there is a feeling that as the pandemic kind of recedes a bit in people's memory when they look back at what Margaret Ferrier did, I suspect that there is a feeling that she was stupid, but that she's probably paid quite a high price for that, and that I don't know, perhaps there's a bit of sympathy out there for her as well. And I think the thing that the SNP are going to be worried about is that there is less anger at Margaret Ferrier personally than there is for the SNP generally. I suspect that people are less concerned about what Margaret Ferrier did in relation to getting this, going to London when she was awaiting a test for COVID and then travelling back to Glasgow when she got a result rather than quarantining in London. I suspect that as the passage of time, people are perhaps less upset about that as they are over the GRR, ferries, deposit return, and all of these things. So I think Labour have got to be in with an extremely good shout of winning that by-election if they don't, if it happens, and if they don't, then there's huge questions for Labour to answer over why, against an SNP government that's been in office for this long, they're still not able to beat them in an area that was not so long ago one of their heartlands.
Okay, let's wrap this up then. Ben, starting with you, good week, bad week?
Okay, I'll start with good week, and completely unrelated to politics, but I just thought I wanted to include him because you had to have had a heart of stone not to have watched West Ham win the Europa Conference League and see David Moyes dancing and jigging around like a madman in front of the fans. I mean, any Scottish football fan will know, any football fan will know David Moyes has had, some challenges to get over in his managerial career. So I was really pleased for him personally. Obviously shows that yet another... Sorry?
About time he won something.
Well, yeah, but yet another Scottish manager wins a trophy. So yeah, I was really, really pleased for David Moyes. As for a bad week, we haven't mentioned her for a while, but Nicola Sturgeon was told this week by none other than Amar Anwar that he wants an explanation as to why her council have apparently told the UK COVID inquiry that she doesn't have any informal WhatsApp messages between herself and ministers and advisors from throughout the entire pandemic period. As we know, Matt Hancock gave 100,000 messages to the journalist who wrote his autobiography, which were later leaked. But apparently Nicola Sturgeon doesn't have any, so that's a strange one.
John, how about you?
So I'm going to say this was a good week for Alistair Jack. He appears to be becoming this sort of like conservative mastermind and who's sitting in the background stymieing everything that the Scottish government tries to do and sort of seeming like the voice of reason while he does it. I wonder how long that's going to last. The problem is that at the moment he's targeting. He's had some fertile ground to work on in terms of policies that are clearly quite unpopular with the public. But he's doing quite a good job, but just not seeming like he's the big nasty conservative, but just sticking up for common sense. And on this, in the same vein, Lorna Slater's had a really bad week again. She had spent months and months in Parliament insisting that the deposit return scheme would be going ahead come hell or high water, that all of the industry, consumers had to get ready for it. They had to prepare to spend money on it, and that there was no chance that anything was going to block that going ahead. It's now been blocked from going ahead, so it's a really enormous failure on her part, I guess, not to have been able to see that through. Not whether or not it's been maliciously stymied by the UK government is debatable, but she should have, if it has been, she should have saw it coming, and she should have been preparing for that, and she shouldn't have told everybody that it was definitely going to happen.
Listen, thanks for that. That's terrific. That's it for another week. I hope you enjoyed the latest Planet Holyrood. Hope you join us next week for another edition. No doubt DRS will still be featuring quite prominently. So see you soon.
Pringle, it's important we look at the facts. Why?
Douglas Ross is sounding pretty scared.
I believe in independence. And he clapped like a seal.